Hi, good morning. Am I audible behind? Okay, so yeah, the interesting part about my job is that I help vendors make some more money out of users, and I help users save some more money out of vendors. That's an interesting job. But the fact of the matter is, as a part of my responsibility, I often take back feedback from you guys in terms of what are some of your pain points, what are some of your issues, what are some of the challenges that you're struggling with. And I help vendors align the strategies, align the product strategies in terms of, hey, these are some of the issues that users face, and this is what we should be doing to kind of deal with some of the complexities that they're facing within the organization, right? Most of from a storage perspective. So that's pretty much what I do. What I'm going to be doing today is deal with one of your favorite topics of discussion. In fact, you have many topics of discussion. Number one is how do you contain the growth of storage within your environment, or the growth of capacity within your environment? That's a top challenge. Number two, with the growing penetration of VDI, the growing penetration of server virtualization, right? The question that comes up very, very often in most of the end user discussions that I have is, where do these things meet with storage? What is the impact on storage as a result of x86 virtualization? What is the impact of storage as a result of virtual desktops infrastructures? What is the impact on storage from a big data point of view? The fact of the matter is, not too many organizations in India completely understand that as you kind of go about doing some of these fancy things, you tend to forget that storage is an important and an integral part of the entire planning process. As a result of you doing some of these things, you're talking about a significant increase in the complexity of storage. There's a significant increase in the amount of capacity that you have to deploy. And of course, the whole thing just gets, there are repercussions in terms of the trained sales force, there are repercussions in terms of some of the efficiency technologies that you need to deploy, and so on and so forth. So yeah, I only have about 30 minutes, and I have the enviable task of talking about all things storage in less than 30 minutes. So I'll just kind of touch on the important points and make sure I don't leave out anything which is too important. And if you do have any questions, I'm going to be around, and I'll be happy to answer them for you. So when you talk about storage for the next 5-year perspective, right, there are some very, very important considerations that you need to kind of keep in mind. Your job, from a storage point of view, is to improve agility, improve efficiency, and improve flexibility. These three things are extremely important. Oh, okay. So yeah, these three things are extremely important from a storage infrastructure design point of view. Number one, as in you might say, fair enough, as in because of the environment, because of the number of things that I have to do, I probably choose one of them. But the fact of the matter is that as you kind of go about designing your plan, it is important that you think about all these three things in equal measure. One cannot make do without the other, and the fact of the matter is that you need to. Okay, I hope this works better. Okay, so the fact of the matter is that you cannot do one without the other. And all three things are extremely important paradigms in terms of deciding on a successful storage plan, right? The market in India is growing at about 25%. These are in terms of absolute revenue terms. And I'd be surprised if there's an organization over here that is growing, that has a IT budget growth of about 25%, right? I'll be surprised if there are organizations over here that actually have double-digit increase in IT budgets for the year 2012 and actually moving beyond. So think about these things. These things are extremely important, and most importantly, you need to have a storage plan. Organizations in India, and this is I've seen in about 60%, 70% of the organizations, you do not have a well thought of storage plan. A plan that is closely aligned with the business, a plan that factors in some of your growth projections, factors in what are some of the applications that you plan to introduce, and so on and so forth, is extremely critical for the success of your storage strategy. Technology is just one aspect of things, right? More important is the business plan behind it. More important is the technology plan behind it. And I think the way things are evolving, I think we'll get to a stage where you will not have a technology plan anymore. What you will have is a business plan, right? And that's the kind of maturity the business is heading towards, and it is important for you as CIOs to start thinking about some of these things. So getting back to storage. So the important point over here is that you need to look at what's going to happen from a future perspective, right? Things are moving towards cloud. Things are moving towards flexible IT, all right? And as IT organizations, you need to move from being a hosting provider to your internal teams to being a service provider. It is important from a flexibility standpoint that you introduce a set of services within your organizations, okay? Right? Something that your organization can, or your business can quickly kind of ramp up, right? You are more flexible in terms of catering to their requirements, and no longer will be there be a situation where the business comes to you and says, I need to do this, how long will you take? And the answer should not be 6 months or 8 months. It should be more so saying, okay, fine, 2 days or 3 days or maybe in a few hours. So I guess from that perspective, it becomes important that you plan to be more of a service provider to the business rather than just being an infrastructure provider. Okay? You have to think about things like efficiency of infrastructure as you plan for your capacity requirements in the future. You have things like thin provisioning, you have auto-tiering, solid-state drives, scale-out arrays, and of course, data deduplication technologies. I'll probably talk about them as we kind of move along. All right? And fact of the matter also is that, like I'd already said, most organizations are moving towards the cloud, and it is important that you as an organization have some kind of a vision in terms of how you're going to be embracing some of these things. I know there is a lot of skepticism around cloud. There are a lot of issues about security, remediation of services, and so on and so forth. But the fact of the matter also is that most organizations tend to use an excuse which was valid 3 years back. There is a lot of innovation that's happened. There is a lot of technology advancements that's happening. And it is important that you speak to your vendor to understand what are some of the new things that are available and how you can try and inculcate that within your environment. So my presentation is basically going to be talking about 3 issues. Okay, how will emerging technologies such as virtualization and cloud intersect with storage? Okay, what are some of the best practices for improving your storage strategy? And what are some of the best practices for containing the growth of capacity within your organization? I'll just kind of quickly move through. Server virtualization, virtual desktop infrastructure. The number one thing that it does is that it increases your capacity requirement. Not just capacity, but it also kind of plays a very important role in increasing the amount of complexity within your environment and the complexity of your storage infrastructure. When you talk about server virtualization, for example, all right, we're talking about things like, IT organizations or IT teams deploying VMs in a matter of few minutes. That's number one. Number two, as you kind of move towards the cloud environment, you're allowing the business the flexibility to do that at their own pace. The fact of the matter over here is that as you kind of go about deploying these VMs, each of these VMs have a certain amount of storage associated with it, and the size of the storage associated varies by application, by VM. And again, you're talking about different RTO requirements for each of for the amount of storage that you kind of associate behind that. All right, and you're probably staring at a lot of complexity within your storage environment. Okay, so work with your vendors, plan for something like this, and strategize in terms of what is it that you want to do. Okay, private cloud computing. Okay, if you look at the IT maturity, model that Gartner has developed, a lot of organizations today are moving from a virtualized environment, are saying, okay, fair enough, I have about 30% of my x86 infrastructure virtualized today. I've crossed the phase one. I'm probably going to be talking about virtualizing the remaining 30% now. Move from 30% to 60%. But what they're really trying to achieve is move to a private cloud environment. All right? There are some applications that you can virtualize. There are some stuff that you shouldn't be virtualizing. Okay, but the fact of the matter is that from a vision perspective, I think a lot of organizations today are saying, hey, in the next 1.5 years to 2 years, this is where I want to be in terms of having that flexibility within my organization. And hybrid environment is equally possible, where you say, most of my mission critical applications will be within my environment, but I think 2 or 3 applications which can tolerate a certain amount of latency will probably be pushed to the public cloud. All right? So I'll probably kind of talk about public cloud in greater detail as we kind of move along. Again, big data. Here's some of my perspective. All right? Big data in India is a very, very emerging concept. Right? It's like cloud 3 years back or 4 years back, when everybody wanted to talk about cloud, everybody wanted to have cloud within the vision in terms of moving things to the cloud. And of course, the press is going absolutely bonkers about big data right now. So the fact of the matter is that it's very niche today. Very, very little is understood in terms of what big data really means. To many, big data basically means scale-out architectures, which is not the case. There is a significant amount of analytics behind this, and it's important that you get a better understanding in what big data really means before you kind of start talking about, or embarking on the journey towards big data. All right? You have things like business analytics, you have social media, you have 24/7 operations, and of course, regulatory environment. Now, I understand that regulations or regulatory environments don't really mean too much for Indian organizations. If you're an IT service provider, if you have a substantial amount of your business being done in Western Europe or in the US, I understand compliance laws is important for you. But then if you are a manufacturing company, besides a few things here and there, regulations and compliance don't necessarily play a very, very important role. When you talk about 24/7 kind of operations, that has an impact on the number of copies that you keep. Typically, an organization has about 4 copies or 5 copies of data. But I have seen organizations, and I have spoken to organizations that have actually had 18 to 20 copies of the same data, right? And these are Indian organizations. So, as you kind of plan for 24/7 kind of operations, I think you kind of factor in the growth capacity and the number of copies of data that you're going to keep. Technology benefit map. All right? A number of these technologies have been around for some time. They've been, vendors have been talking about it. You've been reading a lot about it. And I think a lot of the organizations over here, or the audience over here today, has probably deployed some of these technologies. So most of the technologies available today address different parts of the market, different parts of the technology challenges that you face within your organization. One is about equipment efficiency. We're talking about on-demand capacity expansion. Okay, we're talking about flexibility, and of course, storage provisioning. For example, thin provisioning, right? It's been a technology that's been around for some time. I think a lot of organizations here are probably looking at it. But the important thing is that if you don't have thin provisioning, let me give you some statistics. In a typical DaaS environment, you're talking about utilization rates of about 10 to 30%. And 30% is a very good number. A lot of Indian organizations are probably in the low 20s today. Okay? In a SAN environment, unmanaged SAN environment, we're talking about utilization rates of about 35 to 45, maybe in 50%. Leading edge companies are probably looking at 50% utilization today. But if you move to a thin provisioned environment, we're talking about utilization rates of being anywhere in the range of about 70% to almost about 80%. If you move from thick to thin provisioning, we're probably talking about 30% or maybe even 40% of your capacity being available for some of the other projects that you plan to do. And in most organizations in India, I think it is a capacity that you can probably use for the next 6 months, maybe even 8 months. So huge, huge savings in terms of what this technology can do for you. All right, and if you haven't deployed it already, you probably should be talking about this with your vendor community. Of course, auto-tiering, another hot technology which is available, right? This was probably introduced in the market about 2.5 years back. All right, we went through a phase where the technology was not completely mature, and vendors were pretty much trying to fix some bugs around this. But I think this technology is available for prime time now. I think there are enough and more reference accounts on what this technology can do for you. And a lot of organizations have already kind of looked at tiered storage or automated storage tiering and have had substantial savings in terms of costs. Okay, how many of you in this audience actually have tiered storage within your environments? Just one? Wow. Okay, so I probably need to talk about storage tiering first then. Okay, so the fact of the matter is, I'll give you some economics behind this. If you're talking about storage provision, about storage tiering, all right, organizations tend to save as much as about 45% to maybe even 50% as they kind of plan to move to storage tiering. Okay, what it basically says is that the most important data is probably sitting on the highest tier of disk that is available, and data which is mostly unstructured, 80% of your data is unstructured, and of that 80%, 60% of data hasn't been accessed in more than 3 months. So if you actually have about 100 terabytes within your environment, just do the math. I think 45 terabytes of data has not been accessed, but it still continues to kind of spin on the most expensive disks. Look at storage tiering. It is an important technology and has substantial savings in terms of the amount of money that you can save. Deduplication, another hot technology. Lots has been happening around this, and I think from a hype cycle perspective, I think from a perspective of penetration, we're probably talking about a 50% or 60% penetration within the Indian market, which is fairly good. Okay. Scale up to scale out. This is actually quite an old slide that I have over here. Okay, but the fact of the matter is, if you look at scale-up architecture, it's a lot of what you've been historically using, the likes of the mid-range products that a lot of vendors have actually kind of been offering to you. Okay, but the fact of the matter is that scale-up has pretty much reached the zenith in terms of the number of disks it can actually support. In the mid-range storage box, we're probably starting at about 1,000 disks. In the high-end monolithic market, we're probably talking about 2,000, 2,500 disks. Vendors are making incremental advancements over there just to kind of feed the beast out there in the market. But a lot of the innovation today is actually happening in scale-out. That's where most of the vendors seem to be innovating today. That's the focus that a lot of organizations, a lot of vendors have actually identified for themselves. And if you look back carefully, a lot of the innovation in the last 1 year, has actually happened, or maybe probably even more, has actually happened in the scale-out architecture. It is an important technology, right? And you should probably be looking at scale-out very seriously as you kind of plan for your next procurement. Talking in terms of what are some of the strategies, I think it is extremely critical that you have a vision. You cannot let a problem grow over you. As an organization, it is important that you be proactive in terms of saying, this is where I am today, and this is where I want to be. These are some of the milestones that I want to achieve along the way. These are some of the problems that I'm going to be facing as I kind of plan for something like this, right? Don't get taken by surprise. It is important that you do not have surprises as you plan for your storage journey, okay? Build a proactive plan. Understand your business environment, right? Understand the requirements of the business. Understand what kind of applications are going to be launched. What is the kind of capacity growth that you're talking within your organization? What is the kind of challenges, mostly from a cultural perspective? What are some of the challenges that you're planning that you may undertake, and so on and so forth? And a storage plan is absolutely critical. Organizations in India tend to look at infrastructure to solve the problem. The notion that I buy infrastructure and that's going to solve my problem for me is a false assumption. What is important is a business plan or a technology plan. And unless and until you have a sound technology plan, most of your investments are not going to give you the results that you want to achieve. So yes, your current state, where you're talking about protocols, you're talking about RAID levels, you're talking about storage tiering, disk types, so on and so forth, to an end state where you're looking at agility of infrastructure, you're looking at flexibility of infrastructure. And the discussions that you have internally within your organizations is going to see a market shift over the next 2 to 3 years. And if you're not having those interactions with your business, if you're not having those interactions in terms of strategizing the growth for the company moving forward, you're going to lose out on a lot of the opportunities. So it's important that you have a vision and plan for that. I've spoken about business needs. Understand your business needs. Understand the requirements of the business. Okay, be available for the business. I made the point previously about there not being a technology strategy, there only being a business strategy. A lot of the organizations today are probably looking at something in that direction already. I know of CIOs who actually carry revenue targets. I know of CIOs who actually say, hey, enough, I am responsible for the growth of the company. This is what I'm going to be doing. All that comes out of a very good understanding of what the business requires, all right? Understanding of where the growth lies, what is business trying to do, and what is the roadmap for the company for the next 2 to 3 years. And thereafter, understanding what technology will do and what is the roadmap for technology. Okay, so both things move hand in hand. Okay, as we kind of move along, one of the most difficult part of my job is to kind of keep pace with all the technology advancements that are happening. Okay, every day I spend about 2 to 3 hours just pretty much understanding what are some of the technology developments happening, what are some of the new products that a vendor has launched, what are some of the new technologies that a vendor has launched. And yes, of course, off late I've also kind of started paying very keen attention to mergers and acquisitions, because every other day there's a new company getting acquired. Okay, so the point of the matter is that as we kind of move along, you're going to have a problem of choice. Not that you do not have too much choice, you will have too many choices that you need to think about. The fact of the matter is, technology innovation is happening at a very rapid pace. Storage technology innovation is probably happening twofold or maybe even threefold to that of any other infrastructure piece in the market today. All right? And you're going to have a situation where you will not know what is it that you need to do. So here again, vendors will come and make a pitch. And unless and until you really understand what is it that you want to do, you probably just go ahead and make the wrong choice. So think about it. Come up with a decent plan. Come up with a plan which you think will be successful. Think about the various aspects of the market. For example, principles. As a company, you need to take a strategic decision. Am I going to be a one-vendor shop? Am I going to follow a policy of dual vendors? Gartner recommendation is a dual vendor policy. Okay, in-house versus hybrid. A lot of organizations today are saying, I don't want to take the risk of moving to a public cloud. That is not something that I want to do. But the fact of the matter is that there are cost savings associated with it. And there are a number of applications within your environment today that you can safely put onto the public cloud. There were concerns about the service provider network. That the service providers weren't exactly mature. The fact of the matter is that service providers, there are some very big names in the market today, and they have some very good business practices, some very good infrastructure practices, and I think there is a sound story for you to look at. Okay, so fair enough, as in you're probably looking at an in-house versus hybrid kind of environment, technology maturity. Okay, some organizations might decide that you do not want to work with startups. The fact of the matter is that startups are the ones that are actually doing most of the innovation in the market today. Right? I spoke about mergers and acquisitions. The fact of the matter is that most startups have actually been acquired. Right? The fact of the matter is that you probably need to kind of start thinking about some of these things. Focus on the constraints. You're going to have budget constraints. You're going to have constraints around schedules. You're going to have constraints around data center locations. You as an organization might say, okay, fair enough. These are some of the regions that I can explore for my data center. Or from a real estate perspective, these are some of the regions that I cannot probably look at for whatever reasons. Okay? Be proactive is what I'm recommending. Okay? Be proactive, take the bull by its horns, decide what is it that you want to do as an organization. Organization and operational challenges. Missing skills. The one thing I see a lot of end users, the mistake that they tend to make is that once there is a budget cut, the first thing that you do is reduce training costs. You actually shave training costs in a number of instances. Look at it this way. Your complexity is increasing, but you aren't spending enough to train your people. Right? And that is a situation that you do not want to be in, because as you really need skilled resources to be able to do the job within your organization. You need to have a good understanding in terms of saying, this is where my company is going, these are the skill sets that I have available today, and this is where I need to invest to be able to have the skill sets to look at the infrastructure in the future. All that is a part of a successful plan, and an organization should be focusing on that. Okay? You do not have the option of over-delivering on application requirements. Gone are the luxuries when you said, okay, fine, this is what I need for the next, say, 3 years, this is what I need for the next, say, 5 years, let me just go about and start or make that investment right now. As an organization, you need to be just a step ahead or maybe a couple of steps ahead, but just don't walk the extra mile from an application point of view. Okay, cope with resistance to change. I would in fact recommend that you have a marketing function within the CIO team, a guy who is responsible for convincing the internal organization and the internal management to kind of think about or accept some of these thought-provoking ideas, some of the change that an organization is likely to see. Okay? So important things that you should be focusing on. Getting to the third key issue, I'm probably going to just rush through this. These are some global numbers there for you, but I'll just probably talk from an India perspective. Organizations in India have about, the capacity growth in India is more like in the range of about 80%, 90%. Okay? The last economic recession that we had was in 2008. At that time, organizations bought 85% more capacity than the previous year. The capacity or the CAGR growth for capacity for the next, say, 5 years is 85%. So these are very heady numbers. It is important that you as an organization start thinking about some of these things. Right? Capacity growth in India is about 25%. And if you look at the CAGR growth up until 2016, we're talking about an 18.9% growth for storage revenues. To my point previously, your IT budgets are growing in single digits. And you probably are already in a stage where your storage budgets, or rather you're compromising on something else to be able to satisfy your storage budgets today. So start thinking about some of these things. Two complementary approaches, capacity management and effective capacity utilization. I'll probably touch upon this, so I'll just kind of rush through. Excuse me. Okay, what I have over here are 10 strategies to manage the growth of data or capacity within your organization. Information lifecycle management, data deletion, tiered storage, data reduction, all right, talking about unified storage, thin provisioning, so on and so forth. I'll probably discuss then each one of them in some bit of detail now. Information lifecycle management. I'm sure all of you understand what ILM really means and what are some of the things it includes. But the fact of the matter is that you cannot implement ILM till you have a successful plan in place, unless and until you have a well thought of plan in place. For ILM to be successful, infrastructure is one part of it. You have your storage tiers, you have your backup, recovery, and whatever, so on and so forth. But the fact of the matter is that you need to work with your business. You need to work with your management to really understand what are some of the challenges moving forward, what data is important, what's not, what are some of the compliance laws governing some of these things, and have a successful strategy in terms of what is it that you want to do. Because unless and until you know what is it that you want to do, unless and until you've classified the data as per its importance, ILM is not going to be successful. Data deletion. Okay, when I talk to organizations about data deletion, I see, that horror look on their faces. Okay, but the fact of the matter is that we have a strategic planning assumption behind this, that 60% of organizations world over will have a data deletion policy by 2014. The fact of the matter is that you have a lot of capacity, almost 40%, maybe even 50% of your existing capacity is stale data that you do not need. So it is important that you as an organization, you as policy makers basically come up with a data deletion policy. These are important things, right? And the cost savings associated with this is almost in the range of about 35% to maybe even 40%, 45%. Archiving. Archiving again, I think the maturity for archiving in India is fairly good. I think organizations are fairly mature when it comes to the archiving policies. And so I won't kind of get into this in great amount of detail. But application requirement. Organizations in India do not have a policy for application retirement. It is important from a capacity perspective, from a perspective of the money that you're spending on something like this, that you have an active application retirement policy. Again, we have a strategic planning assumption behind this, and we say that 60% of organizations the world over will have an active application retirement policy. Okay, I know of organizations in India that have actually retired 250, maybe even 400 applications in a strategic move, and they're actually having substantial cost savings. So as an organization, you probably need to think about application retirement very seriously, because from a cost saving perspective, from a perspective of your roadmap for the future, and so on and so forth, and these are important discussions. Tiered storage. Okay, I touched upon this in some detail, but the fact of the matter is that an organization that had actually implemented tiered storage has had substantial savings. I know of organizations with thin provisioning, with tiered storage, have had savings to the tune of about 35% to maybe even 40% in savings for storage costs. So it's important that you look at tiered storage very, very seriously. It is a very mature technology, all right, and it is not important that information that has very little value is actually sitting on your expensive disks. So the way an organization did this in the past was a storage administrator who said, this piece of information hasn't been accessed in so much time. He goes to the line of business leader and he says, listen, I don't see too much use for this data. You haven't accessed it in so long. I don't have any compliance rules behind this. So I'm just going to go ahead and delete this data or probably move it to a lower tier. So the line of business leader says, sorry, that is not happening. That is my data, right? And I want it to be sitting on the most expensive disks, regardless of whether I use it or not. So in such cases, you start implementing chargeback, right? The way to beat this system, or the way to kind of deal with some of these cultural issues, is to start implementing chargeback. And that has proved to be a very, very effective mechanism to kind of deal with some of the cultural issues. So tiered storage, to my point, is very, very important, and you should be focusing on this. Data reduction, right? By deploying data deduplication, organizations have reported anywhere in the range of about 15:1 to almost 20:1 kind of savings. I've read some press around vendor claims of 200:1. I haven't seen any reference cases around this, so I will accept that number. But I think in India, or rather globally, I've seen an organization that has actually reported 25:1 kind of savings. Of course, data deduplication has a significant impact on your bandwidth savings. It has an impact on the amount of information that is actually going to be transferred. And of course, there are substantial savings from a backup and recovery point of view. So important technology. I'd be surprised if the audience over here hasn't really adopted that technology, but if you haven't, you should be. So just kind of finishing off some of the recommendations. Incorporate storage efficiency technologies. Extremely, extremely important. All right, I personally think, and I don't mean to be rude, but it's actually silly considering that it is actually silly that you're probably not thinking about these technologies. There are a number of options for you available today, and you should be working with your vendor to kind of figure this out and deal with the issue of capacity growth. Invite the business to decide on a strategic plan. Without that, a storage plan is not successful. It is incomplete. Technology, like I said, is only 30% of the issue, 35% of the issue. The remaining 60% or 70% is the business side of things. So unless and until you understand what the business wants, you cannot come up with a successful plan. All right? Plan and train staff. Don't make the mistake of compromising on your staff. Now, I understand that, keeping resources tied to your organization is actually turning out to be quite a bit of an issue. Attrition for IT staff is a huge issue in India, all right? And a lot of organizations kind of struggle with this, okay? Frankly, there's very little that you can do about it, all right? But the fact of the matter is that you probably need to start looking at alternatives. With the existing resources, make sure that they are trained well. They are trained to deal with the complexity of your environment that's going to happen in the future, if it's not already, all right? And it's important that you start looking at some of the available other alternates, like for example, storage as a service or cloud computing, to kind of deal with the issue of staff attrition and so on and so forth. So with that, I come to the end of my presentation. I don't think we have time for questions, but I'll be happy to kind of take any questions that you have offline and any questions that you may have. Perfect. Thank you so much for your time.